Now, this phrase, we were dead. We were dead in our sin. We were dead is his first thing that he's saying. Maybe not sequentially, but in the order of thinking, that's what comes first. We were dead. And I think this phrase might have meant something very particular to his audience, particularly the ones at Ephesus or in the churches around Ephesus that had come from the Jewish background that Paul had. And if you'd allow me to take a little bit of time with some Israel history, I think this dead and alive language might come alive. See, at the very beginning when God calls Abraham's family in Genesis 12 and later in Genesis 15, he makes this covenant with Abraham's family and he says, look, in essence, my single sovereign saving plan for the world is going to come through you and your family. And it does, and we know how that happens. But when he makes covenant with Abraham, there's this, to us, strange scene of where these animals are cut in two. And they walk through them, right? Do you remember, have you ever read this? It doesn't quite make a good flannel graph presentation, so maybe we didn't hear this story in Sunday school. It'll freak the kids out a bit, Here's a cow, stick it on the... But there's this moment, and he walks through these, and the implication, the picture language is, look, I am making covenant with you. I will be your God. You will be my people. And this implication of the animals broken in two is, if I ever break covenant with you, may I be broken in two. Dead, alive. Now, if you know the story of Israel, the Old Testament, they go on and they become this great people, but they're in slavery to the Egyptians. They get delivered, they get rescued, they walk through the wilderness. And right before they go in Deuteronomy, there's this recap of the covenant, and God's reminding them of whose they are. And there's this amazing statement toward the end of the book of Deuteronomy where he says, look, I'm setting before you blessings and curses, life and death. And I'm telling you, choose life. In other words, in your faithfulness to me, there will be life. In your unfaithfulness to me, there will be death. They go on, they live in the land, they want a king, they get Saul. Saul doesn't do so good. God says, okay, I'm choosing David. Out of his house will come the ruler and all this stuff. And so David becomes king. But then David has a kid who, doesn't do so good. His name's Solomon. And the biggest difference, well, didn't David have sins? Well, what about, yeah, David had sins too. But the thing that David never did? Never worshipped other gods. Yeah, there were mistakes, but his heart was never unfaithful in that sense. Solomon, on the other hand, says, I'm going to worship all these other gods. And God says, okay, look, Solomon, listen, out of respect to your dad, I won't rip the kingdom from you now, but as soon as your son comes along, Israel, the nation, will be broken in two. All of a sudden, there's that image again of animals broken in two, of something being broken in two. Here's the nation itself being broken in two. Why? Because of covenant unfaithfulness. You seeing this? You catching this? So when Paul says we were dead, I wonder if all these images were racing up in their consciousness, in their minds, in their hearts, of saying, wait, we were dead. Yeah, we were the people that were called by God, but we were unfaithful. We were broken in two. We were lost. We were dead. We were separated. And then think about the statement that Jesus makes at Passover. He takes the bread and says, this is my body which is broken for you. Saying, you're the ones that were unfaithful. You're the ones that were the people that were unfaithful to God. But here's how faithful Yahweh is to his covenant. So much so that God has come in Christ to be the faithful Israelite right back to God. That's amazing. And all of us today can say, okay, look, that's remarkable because we were all dead. Never mind the Israel story. That story is just like our story. We were all dead. But here comes Jesus onto the scene and saying, look, I know, but I've come to share in your death so that you can share in my life. Jesus joins us in our death so that we can join him in his life. The centerpiece of all the preaching in the book of Acts, the centerpiece of all the preaching in the New Testament is that God raised Christ from the dead. That resurrection has begun, that life wins, that life is victorious. And so then Paul says, we were dead, but now we are alive. What he's saying is, look, because we are in Christ, we get to share that life. That life is now springing up out of you. You may not see it, you may not feel it, you may not always be aware of it, but that life is now springing up out of you. You are alive with Christ. And all of that imagery together is another way of saying you're alive with Christ, is another way of saying that we are this people of God now. We're in. We somehow got included in that big story. Is that awesome or what? That we don't have to sort of say, well, how does my life, how does my itty bitty story make that? No, listen, we got included into this big story. We are now the people of God. How did that happen? Thanks be to God for Jesus Christ.